Today we're resuming our lesson on the set-apart days or the holy days. And today we're looking at Sabbath or Shabbat, which is what we do every week, one of the most important holy days. So as usual, let's go to Leviticus 23, this time verse 3. 6 days work is done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest, a set-apart gathering. You do no work, it is a Sabbath to God in all your dwellings. The Sabbath is such an important holy day that it made it into the Ten Commandments. It's such an important day that God himself followed the Sabbath when he created the world. On the seventh day, he rested. It's also one of the most controversial days. Ask almost anyone how you celebrate the Sabbath and you'll get a different answer from everyone. It's arguably the most simple holy day, and it's also the most complex holy day. It's a commandment that we are again and again reminded to remember, and it seems to be the one that we have forgotten. So let's unpack the Sabbath, the last holy day. First, let's take a look at what was required at the temple during the Sabbath. It was pretty simple. Let's turn to Numbers chapter 28, verses 9 through 10. And on the Sabbath day, 2 lambs, a year old, perfect ones, and 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a grain offering, mixed with oil with its drink offering, the ascending offering for every Sabbath, besides the continual ascending offering with its drink offering. Pretty simple requirements from the temple, which is probably good because this is to be done every single week. So we don't have the temple today. Let's take a look at some Jewish traditions. You could call this the Talmud or Oral Torah, just traditions that our brother Judah does that might be worth looking into. So for a lot of Jews, the Sabbath kind of starts the day before. The Jews call this the preparation day. Remember, Hebrew days start at sunset. So the Friday before Sabbath is the day to sort of get ready for the Sabbath. So there are some traditions that Jews do on this day, the Friday before. It's traditional to clean your house, bathe, and cut your hair on preparation day. As the sun is setting, a meal is eaten to sort of welcome the Sabbath day. The woman of the house lights some candles, and there's various blessings and songs sung. Usually bread and wine is drunk, or challah as the Jews call it. Usually the patriarch will bless the children and then bless his wife by reading Psalms 31 over her. It's also traditional to enjoy your marriage bed on the Sabbath evening. As far as what not to do on a Sabbath, of course, Jewish rabbis are going to be arguing over this for thousands of years. But there are generally 39 forbidden acts of work that are not to be done on the Sabbath. I won't read them all. I'll list them here. You can go through them. You can pause the video if you want. But these are just some guidelines that Jews use as to what not to do on the Sabbath. Also, many Jews will not turn on electrical devices during the Sabbath because there's a verse that we're going to read soon that says, do not kindle a fire on the Sabbath. So by flicking a light switch, you might be kindling a spark somewhere. So they'll do things like leave their lights on all day. They'll set the thermostat to where they need it to and not touch it. Other things like that, just so they don't have to interact with electronics. Some Jews also will have Gentiles do things for them. I've heard of some Jews who will sort of leave a payment outside their door and ask a Gentile or a non-believer to go run an errand for them. Their line of thinking is, well, these people wouldn't be honoring the Sabbath anyway, so there's no harm in having them run errands on the Sabbath day. Let's take a look at some scripture and see maybe what we are required or not required to do on the Sabbath. It might clear up some things. Let's start with Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. And Elohim blessed the seventh day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work which Elohim in creating had made. Like I said, God himself celebrates the Sabbath. He rested on the seventh day of creation, and he set it apart, which means he made it holy. Let's look at Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of God your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days God made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that's in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore God blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. So as you can see, we are commanded to not work on Sabbath. No one in your family, no one in your household, no guests in your household, no animals in your household are to work on the Sabbath. Let's look at Numbers 15, verses 32 through 36. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation. And they put him under guard, because it had not been declared what should be done with him. And God said to Moses, "The man shall certainly be put to death, all the congregation stoning him with stones outside the camp." And the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, as God commanded Moses, and he died. So transgressing the Sabbath is a big deal to God. It is a holy day, a set-apart day, and we are not supposed to be working. I don't know the context behind this man gathering sticks, but clearly it was a severe enough crime to warrant the death penalty. Let's look at Exodus 31, verses 12 through 18. And God spoke to Moses, saying, "And you speak to the children of Israel, saying, My Sabbaths you are to guard by all means, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, to know that I, God, am setting you apart. And you shall guard the Sabbath, for it is set apart to you. Everyone who profanes it, it shall certainly be put to death. For anyone who does work on it, that being shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days' work is done, and on the seventh is a Sabbath of rest, set apart to God. Everyone doing work on the Sabbath day shall certainly be put to death. And the children of Israel shall guard the Sabbath, to perform the Sabbath throughout their generations as an everlasting covenant. Between me and the children of Israel it is a sign forever. For in 6 days God made heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. And when he had ended speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses 2 tablets of the witness, tablets of stone, written with the finger of Elohim." This verse tells us that if we do not honor the Sabbath, we will be cut off from Israel, kicked out of the camp, so to speak. In fact, the idea of being circumcised, which is to take the covenant, and honoring the Sabbath kind of go hand in hand. So it's almost saying that if we don't honor the Sabbath, we aren't partaking in the covenant. So it's a huge deal. Let's take a look at Isaiah 56, verses 2 through 6. "Blessed is the man who does this, and the son of man who becomes strong in it, guarding the Sabbath lest he profane it, and guarding his hand from doing any evil. And let none, the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to God, speak, saying, God has certainly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, Look, I am a dry tree. For thus says God, to the eunuchs who guard my Sabbaths, and have chosen what pleases me, and are holding on to my covenant, to them I shall give in my house, and within my walls, a place, and a name better than the sons and daughters. I give them an everlasting name that is not cut off. Also the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to God, to serve him, and to love the name of God, to be his servants, all who guard the Sabbath, and not profane it, and are holding on to my covenant. Them I shall bring to my set-apart mountain, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their ascending offerings and their slaughterings are accepted on my slaughter place. For my house is called a house of prayer for all the peoples. The Master God who gathers the outcast of Israel declares, I gather still others to him besides those who are gathered to him. In case you had any doubt, this is not just a Jewish thing. It is required from all of us. I think this verse in Isaiah makes it really clear. Any of us who call ourselves the covenant followers, people who honor God, we're required to keep the Sabbath. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 14. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of God your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, so that your male servant and your female servant rest as you do. This is another reminder that even those who are not considered Jewish or Hebrew, but they're under the house of a Hebrew, they're required to keep the Sabbath too. So this is one of those feasts that outsiders are more than welcome to participate, even required to participate. Let's look at Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 31. And that if the peoples of the land bring wares or any grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we would not buy it from them on the Sabbath or on the set apart day, and we would forego the seventh year and the interest of every hand. I'm going to jump over to Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 15 through 17. In those days I saw in Judah those treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, and figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I warned them on the day they sold food. And men of Zoar dwelt there, bringing in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said to them, What evil matter is this that you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? So Nehemiah makes it clear that we are not to buy or sell on the Sabbath day, which makes sense, right? Because we're required not to work. Therefore, why would we go to a restaurant or go to a shop that requires somebody else to work? So we should just refrain from buying and selling on the Sabbath day so that everybody can take a chance to rest. Let's take a look at Exodus chapter 16, verse 23. And he said to them, This is what God has said. Tomorrow is a rest, a Sabbath set apart to God. That which you bake, bake, and that's what you cook, cook, and lay up for yourselves all that is left over to keep it until morning. The context of this story is where God was raining manna down from heaven to feed the Hebrews as they were traveling through the desert trying to get to the promised land. And he's saying here that the day before the Sabbath, the preparation day, go ahead and gather double the amount of manna and bake and crush the grain, make the bread dough, and bake the bread the day before Sabbath so that you don't have to cook on the Sabbath. Many people think that we shouldn't be cooking on the Sabbath because of verses like these. This is one of those times where it's just my thoughts. This is not scripture. This is just me and what my family does. We try not to cook big meals on the Sabbath. We try to limit it to sort of finger foods or things that you can easily sort of throw together like sandwiches and things like that. But we're not opposed to heating something up in the oven or microwaving it or whatever the case may be. I think there's a difference between just kind of throwing something together and cooking a full-blown meal. And where that line is, it's kind of up for you and your family to decide. But maybe you feel like you shouldn't do anything. And some Jews and other people just leave out trays of food and just sort of pick at it all day. It's just whatever your family is comfortable with. Let's look at Exodus chapter 35, verses 2 through 3. Work is done for 6 days, but on the seventh day it shall be set apart to you, a Sabbath of rest to God. Anyone doing work on it is put to death. Do not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. So this verse is pretty challenging. At face value, it seems to be saying that we should not be making a fire in our homes or anywhere in our houses. And if you kind of run with this, does that mean we shouldn't be using electronics? We shouldn't be turning on our heater. We shouldn't be turning on our ovens. You can really kind of take this verse pretty far in what we're not supposed to be doing. And some people do. Some people refuse to light a fire on the Sabbath or refuse to use electronics on the Sabbath. This is another one of those times, it's just my opinion. Feel free to look into this yourself or disagree with me. But if you read this section of Exodus as a whole, if you go back several chapters and you read the next several chapters, he's talking about building the tabernacle here. And if you recall, the instructions of the tabernacle, they go on and on and on in very great detail about all of these specific measurements and specific materials that needed to be used to make the tabernacle. And if you remember, the priests asked for donations of gold from the people so they could build the tabernacle. And the Hebrews were so excited that they gave more gold than they needed. The priests told them, stop giving us gold because we have enough. So the way I interpret this verse is God is saying, I know you're excited to build my tabernacle, but don't forget the Sabbath while you're building it. Because there's several reasons you'd want to kindle a fire if you were a blacksmith or a rancher. There's a number of professions that require fires to do the work. And I think that's what he's saying here is don't make a fire to do the work of the temple on the Sabbath day. Because remember, Israel is sort of in the desert, and it does get really cold at night. And I don't think God is saying, don't warm your homes, don't light a candle, just sit in the dark all night long on the Sabbath. I think the Sabbath is a day of joy and rest and fun, and it just sounds miserable to eat cold food and be in a cold house. So I really don't think we're forbidden to heat ourselves with a fire or light our rooms with a fire, but we are forbidden to do work with a fire. Okay, that was a lot of scripture, and hopefully you're getting some idea of how the Sabbath should be honored. Let's take a look at whether the Sabbath was connected to Jesus or not. Let's go to Mark chapter 2, verses 23 through 28. And it came to be that he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. And as they went, his taught ones began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, Look, why do they do what is not right on the Sabbath? And he said to them, Have you never read what David did when he had need and was hungry, he and those with him? How he went into the house of Elohim. Well, Abiathar was high priest, and ate the showbread, which is not right to eat, except for the priests. And he gave it also to those who were with him. And he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Adam is also master of the Sabbath. So Jesus and his apostles are walking along the road, and they're sort of plucking heads of grain as they go by. Remember, farmers were required to not cut the edges of their fields. It was sort of an act of charity so that those who didn't have as much could have a little bit to eat, and the apostles were taking advantage of this, just plucking the heads and eating them as they walked. The Pharisees saw this and they said, Aha, you're doing work on the Sabbath. This is forbidden. And Jesus says, Look, you Pharisees have blown this way out of proportion. All these rules and regulations are stressing people out. The Sabbath is just meant for humans. We probably all know somebody who works 7 days a week. They're just go, 80-hour weeks, and they totally burn themselves out eventually. And that's why we have the Sabbath. God knows that we as humans need rest. We need breaks. And it's not supposed to be this burdensome thing that is placed upon us, where we have to do all these specific regulations. He made the Sabbath for us to enjoy and to rest. And Jesus is just reminding the Pharisees that that's what the Sabbath is all about. Let's also take a look at Luke chapter 14, verses 1 through 6. And it came to be, as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat with, that they were watching him closely. And see, there was a certain man before him suffering from dropsy. And Jesus responding, spoke to those learned in the Torah and the Pharisees, saying, Is it right to heal on the Sabbath? But they were silent. So taking hold of him, he healed him and let him go. And to them he said, Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, shall not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they were unable to answer him regarding these matters. This is another instance of Jesus pointing out that some of the Jewish traditions were a little too burdensome for the Sabbath. He says, if your animal falls into a ditch, you're not going to leave them till the next day. You go and help them. So if there's an emergency on the Sabbath and you need to work to resolve this emergency, I think it's totally okay. I think that's really what the heart of what Jesus is saying right here. Don't get me wrong. Jesus did follow the Sabbath. We have multiple accounts of him resting on the Sabbath day. But he didn't stick to the strict Jewish traditions of these 39 laws that needed to be done. He recognized that the Sabbath was made for humans, and it's a holy day to be enjoyed. And he tried to teach that wherever he went. Let's quickly look at a prophetic implication about the Sabbath too. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 66, verses 20 through 24. And they shall bring all your brothers as an offering to God out of all the nations, on horses and in chariots and in litters, on mules and on camels, to my set apart mountain Jerusalem, declares God. As the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel into the house of God. And from them too I shall take for priests, for Levites, declares God. For as new heavens and the new earth that I make stand before me, declares God, so your seed and your name shall stand. And it shall be that from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares God. And they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of the men who transgressed against me. For their worm shall not die, and their fire shall not be quenched, and they shall be repulsive to all flesh. This prophecy takes place during the millennial reign, which is the period of time that Jesus returns to earth to rule. And it's said here that we will still be doing the Sabbath in the millennial reign. So God wasn't kidding when he said, this is a law for your generations forever. All right, that was a lot to unpack, but let's answer the big question. How do we celebrate the Sabbath? Well, first and foremost, we are not to work on the Sabbath. But the tricky question is, what is work? Well, I think we can safely say that any activity that you get paid for can be considered work. Whether that be working your 9-to-5 job or working a side hustle, maybe selling something on eBay, just don't do any of that during the Sabbath. It's a time to rest, a time to trust that God's going to take care of your finances. But what about work that we don't get paid for? Things like washing dishes or doing laundry or mowing the lawn. How do we deal with that kind of thing on the Sabbath? So this is just my personal opinion. You are free to form your own opinion. But I believe that if you don't want to do it, don't do it on the Sabbath. There are men who love mowing the lawn. It's sort of like a Zen activity for them. And to be told that they can't do that on the Sabbath is more of a punishment than a reward. I hate mowing the lawn, so I don't mow the lawn on the Sabbath. But for a man that wants to mow the lawn, I would say go for it. Go mow the lawn on the Sabbath. If you enjoy tinkering or sewing or doing any sort of manual, craft, if it's something that you genuinely have fun with, I think it's okay to do it on the Sabbath. But those things that you just don't want to do, that you have to do, I think maybe those can wait. You can either do them on the preparation day or the Sunday after. Also, I think you should have a nice family dinner on Friday night to sort of welcome in the Sabbath. I'm not saying you have to do all the blessings and eat challah and drink wine and everything that the Jews lay out, but I think it's nice to have a family meal where everyone sits down and there's no TV going or anything like that, where you can have a good conversation. I also think it's important that we don't force others to work on the Sabbath. So our family does not buy or sell on the Sabbath. We don't go into shops, we don't go to football games or anything like that where people are getting paid, because we don't want to force other people to work. In an ideal world, everyone would be taking a Sabbath. I think the world would be a much better place if we all did. Also, I think Sabbath is a great day to study the Torah. And if you have a gathering, a lot of us do gather on the Sabbath. I think it's a great time for it. So what if you've decided not to work on the Sabbath, but for some reason you have to? Whether, your boss tells you that you have to come in on Saturday, or maybe you work in the healthcare field where you shift into working in the weekends, or in some kind of emergency service where you have to work on Saturdays. It's a tough question, and it's definitely one that I sympathize with. For starters, there are certain jobs that I think are okay to do on the Sabbath. Healthcare workers, emergency services, I think things like that are kind of necessary on the Sabbath. We've seen an example where Jesus does heal on the Sabbath, so healing seems to be permitted in emergency scenarios. Also, if you read the book of Maccabees, the Maccabee brothers fought on the Sabbath. They defended their country, and they were blessed for it. So I think, police, soldiers, firefighters, that sort of thing, it's okay to do that on the Sabbath. But what about other jobs, things like waiting a restaurant or running a store? It's kind of up to you and your family to decide what to do there. I understand that sometimes you can be kind of stuck in a job and not have many choices, but I would encourage you to sort of thinking about maybe changing careers or talking with your boss and seeing if they would work with you and letting you have Saturdays off. I know these aren't perfect solutions and sometimes they don't work, but it never hurts to try and ask. Um, but if you're stuck in that situation, my heart goes out to you. I really do wish you could celebrate on Sabbath, and I hope that someday in the future you can. Let's look at a few more verses while we wrap this up. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12. And I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between them and me, to know that I am God who sets them apart. I think this is really special because it shows that not only did God give us Sabbaths to revitalize us after working all week, but he gave them to us to set us apart, to make us holy, because we are his people and it is a sign of the covenant. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 58, verses 13 and 14. If you do turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my set-apart day, and shall call the Sabbath a delight, the set-apart day of God esteemed, and shall esteem it, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in God, and I shall cause you to ride on the heights of the earth, and feed you with the inheritance of Jacob your father, for the mouth of God has spoken. I think this kind of brings home the point of following the Sabbath is a sign of taking the covenant, of being part of Israel, of being one of God's children. And he says he will bless us for doing the Sabbath, and we will get a share of our inheritance that he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A lot of people who don't do the Sabbath think of it as a burden. I mean, think about it. Saturdays are the days for garage sales. They're the days for concerts and sporting events. And a lot of people kind of get mad at the thought of giving those up. But those of us who've been doing this know that the Sabbath is an incredibly restful time. It's a day to draw closer to God and your family, a day to sort of rejuvenate after a hard week of work. We know that the Sabbath is a blessing. It makes us set apart. And we know that we'll be doing the Sabbath long into the time after Jesus returns and into the millennial reign. So that wraps up our series on the holy days. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you learned something. If you have something to share, please post it down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts or want to reach out, the comments are there too. Again, I hope you learned something, and I don't know if I'll continue doing these videos for the next lesson, but if I do, I'll see you then.